everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're Nebraska Public Historians. We're here to dedicate a headstone for George Wells Parker. But we're here to dedicate a headstone for George Wells Parker. Wells Parker was a early century civil rights leader and activist here in Omaha, Nebraska. And sadly, when he passed away in 1931, he was buried in an unmarked grave, and unfortunately was largely forgotten by history. And so we were here today to do a small measure to correct this injustice, and someone who really deserves, despite his complications, to have a bigger role in our memory, collectively as a city and as people interested in issues of civil rights. So we're pleased today to have Vicki Young, president of the local Omaha NAACP, and Nick Clausen, who will speak with us today about Wells Parker and his role in Omaha and civil rights history. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Omaha branch of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, I not only stand before you as the president of the branch, but I also stand before you as a longtime citizen of this community, and an advocate who strongly believes in the advancement of our city, not just the city of Omaha, but more particularly North Omaha. Now, I must preface my speech by saying that I'm not a historian, nor do I play one on TV. However, I will admit that this is my first time ever hearing of Mr. George Wells Parker, and so I find it an honor to be included in on this historical moment, recognizing him for his contributions to our city and to the fight in social justice and social injustices. This is Omaha's history. This is our history. Now, here we are on this beautiful day, surrounded by God's natural artistry, as peaceful and serene as it is. I can't help but to reflect on the tumultuous and riotous times our community has experienced as recent as the summer of 2020. That's when George Floyd was killed by police officers in Minneapolis, and James Reginald Scurlock, a young man killed by a business owner here in our very own Old Market. There's also women and young ladies who have succumbed to the violence and or domestic violence in our community. Then there's the infamous lynchings of Mr. Will Brown and that of Mr. George Cole Smith, both heinous crimes by racist mobs at different times in our city's history, right there at our courthouse. Mr. George Wells Parker was an African-American political activist and historian. His intent to improve African pride and Black economic progress, putting pen to paper, giving voice to African-American contributions in civilization, Negro history, and the plight of social injustices. He was intentional. With that being said, I will read for you a poem that Mr. Parker wrote in 1923 entitled, "When Africa Awaits." Africa bides her time, but the ocean strand, or jungle, mountain, vale, and mead, that sweet word unity will speed. O wings of winds, and woo her fretful folk into one dream, one voice, one heart, one hope. And yet, she'll claim her sacred right to rule herself apart from alien might. But if, once more, the pale-faced man shall say, "Not yet, thou backward race, still thine to pay," I quake to think how swarthy arms shall hurl thundering terror at a grasping world when Africa awakes. Like Mr. George Wells Parker, we all must be bold-faced, courageous, and intentional in advocating for social justice while speaking out against the injustices despite the efforts of those who try to diminish our reputation or our work. Preserving our history, according to Mr. Stu Burns, NPH member, he says that if Omaha is to pay tribute to figures, buildings, and events that merit it, it must be purposeful. And so, on behalf of the Omaha NAACP, thank you. Thank you, NPH, the Nebraska Public Historians, Dr. Cynthia Robinson, our treasured historian guru, Ms. Brenda Council, Adam Sass, Bill Costin, Mr. Johnny Payne, Professor Patrick Jones, Mr. Eric Ewing of the Great Plains Black History Museum, the Omaha Community Council for Racial Justice and Reconciliation, individuals from the community, and those who don't hesitate to tell factual history, intentionally preserving local history through public actions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for those wonderful words. I'd like to now welcome Nick Clausen, local historian.
All right, first of all, apologies for the get up. I did not come here expecting to give a speech. I thought I would just be able to kind of hang back in the audience, and I rode my bike here, so this is my bike helmet here. Forgive it. Mr. Parker, I'm sure he won't mind. George Wells Parker first came to my attention some years ago, just researching local history. And he struck me immediately as being a standout human being, a standout intellectual, a standout philosopher, writer, activist. He was a polymath and a genius by any measure. He came from a family, his father owned a business, so a black-owned business in Omaha that was fairly successful. Which gave him the opportunity early on in his life to read a lot. They had lots of books laying around, and he was encouraged from a young age to excel in reading and writing. And when he was a student at what is now Central High School, we had the 1898 Trans-Mississippi Exposition in North Omaha. It was a huge deal. People from all over the country came. And there was a history essay writing contest. Parker was, I believe, 17 or 18 at the time. He was in high school, and he won first prize. I haven't been able to locate a copy of that essay, but the newspapers reported that he won. It was a competition open to students across the country. And hometown hero, Mr. Parker, won it. So we can tell already in his life he's excelling, and he's thinking about history and writing about it. Some years later, he pops up in newspapers across the country. There was an article about his mental breakdown, and it doesn't determine the cause or even speculate about the cause of that breakdown, which I'll get to in a minute, but it does chronicle the fact that he had suffered some kind of mental or nervous breakdown and had been writing. He locked himself in his room, surrounded with his library of books, and was working at something, or possibly many things, reading and writing voraciously, refusing sleep, refusing food, water. His parents were concerned, and the Reverend John Albert Williams was the first leader of the Omaha NAACP, stepped in as a mentor and the two became friends. And later on, when people were speculating about why George Wells Parker had this mental breakdown, people had noted that he had turned away from religion. He was actually an atheist, which is another reason why I kind of connect with him and his story so much. John Albert Williams, the Reverend, said no, it was not his turn away from religion that caused the breakdown. He said it was a book. It was a novel called Leopard Spots by Thomas Dixon, part of a white supremacist trilogy, one of which, The Klansman, went from being a novel to a stage, theater play, to then becoming the first Hollywood blockbuster film, Birth of a Nation, by D.W. Griffith, director. Thomas Dixon had written that story. It is part of the Lost Cause mythology, which portrayed the Confederacy, the white supremacists in the South as being the victims of the federal government. And then post-Civil War in the Reconstruction period, it portrayed black people as savages who are now given, seats in political office, who did not know how to act. They were coming to rape white women. They were coming to burn down your city and destroy civilization itself from the core. The Leopard Spots was part of that trilogy of novels. And the leopard spots comes from a quote in the Bible that you cannot change the color of this man's skin any more than you can change a leopard's spots. And Thomas Dixon, the white supremacist, used that line to basically say, you cannot civilize black people. When Mr. Parker read that, according to John Albert Williams, he suffered his mental breakdown. So I imagine young Parker reading that book and just being hit with a sledgehammer, probably something much larger and forceful than a sledgehammer, shattering him, and trembling at how disgusting and vile and horrible this very popular book was. And knowing that people were out there reading it, and that when they were looking at him, and he's considering himself a learned man, that when they're looking at him, they're seeing a savage, and that nothing he could do, no amount of work that he could do, could change the fact that he is black, and that they're going to view him as a savage the same way a leopard cannot change its spots. So when he had that breakdown and he went into his frenzy of work, he took on the task of destroying Thomas Dixon's ideology, destroying his thesis that black people are just savages by nature and cannot be quote-unquote civilized. And in order to do that, he went back to the origins of Western civilization itself, commonly taught that Western civilization is birthed from Greece, which is in Europe, and then you had the Greek, it spread to the Roman Empire, and then you had the modern European nations kind of carrying the torch of Western civilization, and of course white Americans carrying that torch as well. That was the white supremacist myth that he wanted to destroy. So in order to destroy it, he went to the very roots of it, ancient Greece. He taught himself to read and write Greek. So he went into the very language itself, and he started drawing connections between ancient Greek civilization, culture, religion, mythology, and ideology, and tying it to ancient Egypt and Nubia, and finding that the ancient Greeks had co-opted a lot of their culture from Africa. This thesis completely rearranged the white supremacist myth that Western civilization was conceived in Europe. He argued this thesis in several formats. He got it published in, I can't remember the name of the publication, but it was like a black history academic publication. As an essay, he delivered speeches, portraying his thesis to white audiences across the country. He went on the road, took it on the road. He at one point was vice president of the Omaha Philosophical Society. So he's giving this speech and presenting this idea in front of crowds of white people, white intellectuals. And here he is, this lone, brave soul, courageously speaking in defense of his people and in defense of himself. And the fact that he was able to do that work, that he was brilliant enough to do it, but also brave enough to do it. Making that argument that Western civilization we could trace Western civilization's roots straight back through Greece and further back to Africa would still be, I think, controversial to many white intellectuals to this day. He was doing this 100 years ago. That alone, to me, makes him an extraordinary person, an extraordinary thinker and writer and activist. In his later years, he suffered at least one more mental breakdown, and he had some struggles. He developed a thesis about the lynching of Will Brown that involved the KKK. He started publishing his own newspaper. It was going to be an expose on the local Omaha KKK. He believed they had infiltrated the local power structure and that they had been involved somehow in the lynching. I've not been able to locate a copy of that, but if anyone out there knows of it, please contact us. Contact one of us. You can find me on Facebook under Johnny Payne. I would love to see that thesis that George Wells Parker came up with after the lynching of Will Brown in 1919. So to wrap it up, I'm extremely proud of this group being able to get this new gravestone installed for Mr. Parker. We hope people that are interested in history and the history of the civil rights movement will stop by and spend some time here, commune with Mr. Parker, meditate on his memory, and I guess that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Thank you all to everyone who's put effort, who's worked on this project, and who's donated money to make this happen. Thank you, everyone, and have a good Sunday.